This is not the version that the story told, but the version it has tried to hide.
The Senate assigned a highly experienced deputy to Daxibia. If Daxibia made even the slightest mistake, the deputy would immediately take over his command. But after all, Daxibia was the man destined to defeat Hannibal. When he arrived in Spain, he first comforted the defeated soldiers, claiming that the commander who had died here before was not his real father. In fact, he said, his true father was Poseidon, the god of the sea, and he had come this time to help them take revenge on Carthage. When these defeated soldiers saw how sincere Daxibia was in going so far as to disown his own father, their psychological shadow of their previous defeat was instantly swept away. Daxibia also learned that the enemy forces were divided into 3 armies, each of them a 10-day march away from Cartagena. Cartagena was Hannibal's main base in Spain, and it was also known as New Carthage. Daxibia decided to launch a blitzkrieg against Hannibal's stronghold, just as Hannibal had done to Rome. What was originally a 20-day journey, he completed in just 7 days, and then captured Cartagena in only 1 day. The 3 Carthaginian armies didn't have time to send reinforcements at all. Daxibia knew very well that although he had occupied Cartagena, the enemy's 3 armies were still out there, totaling more than 70,000 men, while he had fewer than 30,000 troops. So, while keeping a close eye on the movements of the 3 Carthaginian armies, he trained his soldiers day and night. The soldiers had to run 6 kilometers with full gear every day. The Roman army required each soldier to carry 10 days' worth of rations while marching, and together with their weapons, each person bore a load of over 10 kilograms. Daxibia was also enthusiastic about improving weapons. Cartagena served as Carthage's granary, treasury, and armory, and it had a large number of craftsmen. Daxibia replaced his troops' long swords with the double-edged short swords used by the native Spaniards. These short swords were lighter and more aggressive in close combat. That year, Daxibia had already made thorough preparations, but the 3 Carthaginian armies did not attack, because defeated Roman generals would not be punished. But it was different for Carthage. Defeat meant facing the death penalty, so none of the 3 commanding generals dared to rashly engage Daxibia in battle. The capture of Cartagena made all of Rome erupt in cheers, while Hannibal had no idea that his homeland had already been lost. At that moment, he was still maneuvering against the Roman legions on the Italian peninsula. Who would have thought that Hannibal, the renowned father of strategy, would finally meet his match? And in order to deal with this person, Hannibal resorted to some truly despicable tactics. This person was none other than Marcellus, known as the Sword of Italy. The Second Punic War was referred to by the Romans as the Hannibalic War. In 210 BC, it was the 9th year since the outbreak of the Hannibalic War. That year, Marcellus was one of the 2 consuls elected in Rome. Previously, Marcellus had been on the battlefield in Sicily, where he had a major confrontation with Archimedes and ultimately recaptured Syracuse. As the saying goes, capable people are always given more. He was sent to the Apulia region in southern Italy, which was the front line against Hannibal. Up until then, the initiative in the war had always been in Hannibal's hands, but the Carthaginian rulers did not know how to seize the opportunity, leaving Hannibal to fight alone on the Italian peninsula. Now, however, the initiative in the war had begun to shift toward Rome. The first to engage Hannibal was a former consul who also commanded 2 legions. Clearly, he was not very competent, and ended up having a major clash with Hannibal. Not only were both of his legions almost completely wiped out, but he himself also met his end. Marcellus took command of the remnants of this former consul's troops and continued to contend with Hannibal. In order to prevent the Roman army from approaching Tarentum, Hannibal kept roaming the deep mountains inhabited by the Samnites. During this period, several small-scale skirmishes broke out between the 2 sides, with victories and losses on both ends. By the following year, that is, 209 BC, Marcellus had already changed. Although Marcellus had become a former consul, his task was still to hold Hannibal at bay. Then, the newly elected consul for that year, Fabius, led 2 other legions to take the opportunity to attack Tarentum. The Romans were well aware that the only truly fearsome person in the Carthaginian army was Hannibal. Sure enough, while the 61-year-old Sword of Italy was locked in a struggle with the 38-year-old Hannibal, Fabius captured Tarentum. Although holding Hannibal at bay came at a great cost, now all the important cities that Hannibal had seized had been recovered. Hannibal was driven to the very edge of Italy, into the region of Calabria. But what awaited Hannibal there was the news of Cartagena's fall. Cartagena was Hannibal's main base in Spain, also known as New Carthage. Hannibal could hardly believe that the place where he had spent his youth had actually been captured in a single day by a mere 26-year-old kid named Scipio. He truly couldn't understand what his 2 brothers and the more than 70,000 troops left in Spain were doing. The year was now 208 BC. Hannibal felt he could not delay any longer. At this point, he no longer had any advantage, and had to deliver a fatal blow to Rome. On the Roman side, they also wanted a decisive battle with Hannibal, because that year, Marcellus was once again elected consul. Over the years, he had been entangled in conflict with Hannibal, but had not achieved any substantial results, so he was under heavy public criticism. He even made a special trip back to Rome to explain to all the citizens just how difficult it was to fight against Hannibal. Although all the citizens understood Marcellus, he still hoped to end the fighting as soon as possible. What was infuriating, however, was that after the Roman army had assembled in Calabria, Hannibal refused to engage in battle. No matter how much the Roman army tried to provoke him, Hannibal simply would not respond. It turned out that Hannibal had already made a plan. There was a small hill between the 2 armies' camps. If a battle broke out, this would be a highly advantageous position, and at that moment, it belonged to neither side. Hannibal sent 300 Numidian cavalrymen to lie in ambush in the forest around the hill under the cover of night. As expected, the Roman army was also very interested in this small hill. Marcellus personally led 220 cavalrymen to scout the area. Since the consul himself was taking part, almost all of Rome's senior commanders came along as well. This approach was truly reckless. These more than 200 men were surrounded by 300 Numidian cavalry, and Marcellus was struck in the chest by an enemy javelin. The other consul and Marcellus's son managed to escape by sheer luck after being seriously wounded. Although Hannibal had anticipated that the Romans would fall into his trap, he hadn't expected to almost wipe out all of Rome's commanders at once. If he'd known, he would have sent even more men. This was truly an incredible stroke of luck, like a calf celebrating its birthday. It was just too awesome. The sword of Italy, who had tangled with Hannibal for so many years, now lay before him as nothing more than a corpse. As a sign of respect, Hannibal cremated the 62-year-old man, placed his ashes in a golden box, and had his men deliver it to Marcellus's son. However, on the way, the Carthaginian soldiers delivering the ashes became greedy for the golden box. During their struggle over it, the box was dropped and broke open. Just then, a gust of wind blew by, and in the end, nothing was left. Today, there is still a tomb for Marcellus in the city of Venosa. The tomb looks quite old, but the inscription on the tombstone is not in ancient Latin, but in modern Italian. But this is not unusual. Many historical sites in the West are like this, making it impossible to verify their authenticity. The wounded commander who escaped did not forget to fulfill his duty, because Marcellus's ring had fallen into Hannibal's hands. At that time, a ring symbolized a person's authority, so messengers were quickly sent out to inform all regions that any documents bearing Marcellus's seal were forgeries. Hannibal did indeed attempt this, trying to use the forged documents to take control of these cities. The wounded consul gave up. The consul on duty abandoned the idea of a decisive battle with Hannibal and instead led his army to defend Tarentum. This decision was extremely wise. As expected, Hannibal wanted to attack Tarentum, but now he could only give up on that plan. Shortly after Hannibal returned to Calabria, this consul ultimately did not survive his severe injuries. In this year, both of Rome's consuls died at the hands of Hannibal, and the situation on the battlefield in Spain was even more perilous. Both Hasdrubal and the Carthaginian army were sharpening their blades, ready for a major confrontation. Hannibal and Scipio were the most formidable generals in the West. The fact that they were born in the same era was already extremely rare, and on top of that, they were arch-enemies who both had a penchant for wreaking havoc in each other's homelands. We all know that Hannibal was invincible on the Italian peninsula, while Scipio faced no rivals in Hannibal's homeland of Spain. It was like two young bulls sitting cross-legged, each trying to prove who was more formidable. In 208 BC, Hannibal took down the sword of Italy, Marcellus, while Scipio launched an attack against the Carthaginian army in Spain. The Carthaginians split their forces into 3 armies, totaling as many as 75 men. Scipio did not have the strength to fight such a massive force head-on, so he had to defeat them one by one before they could join together. The first target was Hasdrubal, who commanded one of the Carthaginian armies. He was Hannibal's second brother, while Hannibal's youngest brother Mago led another force and was preparing to join up with Hasdrubal. Scipio once again employed blitzkrieg tactics. He first sent a detachment to hold off the youngest brother Mago, and then, with lightning speed, appeared before the second brother Hasdrubal. Hasdrubal wanted to wait for his younger brother to arrive before engaging Scipio in a decisive battle, so he made no preparations at all. But unexpectedly, Scipio showed no regard for the rules of war and launched a direct attack. As a result, before Hasdrubal's main forces had time to deploy, Scipio's heavy infantry and cavalry pressed forward. On top of that, with the Carthaginian camp directly behind them, Hasdrubal's troops had even less room to maneuver. Fearing encirclement and the total destruction of his army, Hasdrubal abandoned the camp and fled. This battle took place near the city of Baecula and is known as the Battle of Baecula. On the Carthaginian side, more than 8-0 were killed and over 12-0 captured, while Scipio's losses were negligible. Now Scipio also faced the issue of how to deal with the prisoners. He first released the Spaniards without any conditions, then sent the Carthaginians to Rome, where they would be sold into slavery. Among the prisoners, one in particular caught Scipio's attention. He was born in Numidia, North Africa, and had come to Spain to join his uncle, who was the Numidian prince Massinissa. Massinissa had been hired by Carthage to serve as a cavalry commander. 3 years earlier, Scipio's father had died in Spain, having fallen victim to an ambush by Massinissa. However, at this moment, Scipio was not thinking about revenge, but rather about how to win Numidia over to Rome's side. Not only did he release the prisoner who claimed to be Massinissa's nephew, but he also sent a team to escort him wherever he wished to go. It remains to be seen whether this gesture would help establish a friendship between Scipio and Massinissa. After this battle, Carthage finally realized that a formidable figure had arrived in their homeland. As a result, the remaining 2 armies quickly joined forces with the recently defeated Hasdrubal. Apart from the younger Mago, the other Carthaginian army was led by Gisgo, and the 3 of them engaged in intense discussions on how to deal with Scipio. The final result was that Emperor Hasdrubal led 30 elite soldiers and elephant troops to cross the Alps again to Italy to support Hannibal. Meanwhile, the younger Mago and Gisgo would combine their forces to confront Scipio together. Of course, this plan had already been communicated to Hannibal. Hannibal felt very relieved and waited at the southernmost tip of Italy for Hasdrubal to come to his aid. That was planned. Unfortunately, although his younger brother was born of the same mother, he did not possess Hannibal's talent. Crossing the Alps went very smoothly, because at this moment the Gauls not only did not make things difficult for the Carthaginian army, but even voluntarily joined Hannibal's forces. As a result, after crossing the Alps, the army had grown from 30,000 to 50,000 men. With such a massive army needing to march from the northernmost part of Italy to the southernmost, the younger brother did not consider how to outmaneuver the Romans, but simply chose whichever route was easiest for the march. Of course, the Romans were not about to let him pass. Fabius, known as the Shield of Italy, was furious when he learned that the Carthaginian army had come to Italy from Spain again. He believed this was Scipio's dereliction of duty. The whole point of sending troops to Spain was to prevent Hannibal from receiving reinforcements, yet Scipio had allowed the Carthaginian army to come through. As a result, Fabius swore that he would never trust Scipio again. But there were also those who felt that Scipio had done nothing wrong. If he had gone after Hasdrubal the Fair, then his subordinates Mago and Gisgo would surely have launched a sneak attack from behind. Moreover, in order to prepare for Hasdrubal's arrival, Rome increased its number of legions from 21 the previous year to 23 in 207 BC. There were two reasons why Hannibal did not go to meet Hasdrubal earlier. First, he did not expect Hasdrubal to arrive so quickly. Second, Calabria in southern Italy was already his last stronghold, and he feared that if he left, Rome would seize the opportunity to wipe it out, since none of his subordinates were capable of defending it. Therefore, although Hannibal began to march north, his advance was extremely slow. What Hannibal could never have imagined, even in his wildest dreams, was that although he waited for Hasdrubal, all he received in the end was a severed head. Hannibal was the most miserable general I have ever seen. He originally wanted to wait for the two emperors to help him, but after waiting day and night, he only got nothing. Rome and Carthage fought a total of 3 Punic Wars, with the Second Punic War being the longest and most famous. In 207 BC, Hannibal had already been fighting alone on the Italian peninsula for 11 years when he finally learned that Hasdrubal was coming to his aid. Hasdrubal took the same route into Italy as Hannibal had years before, first crossing the Pyrenees from Spain, then passing through the territory of the Gauls, and finally crossing the Alps into Italy. But once he entered Italy, the situation was no longer the same. Although they were brothers, Hasdrubal did not possess Hannibal's talent. He didn't know how to evade the enemy and join forces with Hannibal. Moreover, there was someone in Rome who absolutely hated Hasdrubal, and that was Claudius Nero. 4 years earlier, Nero had been sent to Spain, but ended up being outmaneuvered by Hasdrubal. This made the Senate think Nero was useless, so they recalled him to Rome ahead of schedule, and then sent the young Scipio to replace him in Spain. Everyone in Claudius' family was very concerned about their reputation. Nero felt that he was like a calf pulling a millstone, going around in circles and being ashamed. So when he heard that the two emperors were coming to Italy with an army of 50, he could no longer contain himself. At this time, Nero's task was to keep Hannibal occupied. Roman regulations stated that once a commander was assigned a mission, he could not change his theater of operations unless the Senate reassigned him. However, Nero broke the rules for his own personal reasons. He led 7,000 soldiers to provide reinforcements, preparing to confront Hasdrubal's consul, Livius. At this moment, Hasdrubal had 50,000 men, while Livius only had 30,000, so this became Nero's excuse to go and assist. Before leaving, Nero instructed his partner not to let Hannibal realize that he was no longer in the camp. Otherwise, Hannibal would surely seize the opportunity to launch a major attack. During this period, they needed to actively initiate small-scale skirmishes to confuse Hannibal. The usual marching speed for Roman troops was 20 kilometers per day, but Nero's march covered a distance of 800 kilometers. He ordered the soldiers to travel light, not even carrying food, and notified people along the route in advance. He notified the allied cities along the route in advance to prepare food, so they were able to march over 100 kilometers day and night. His record for marching speed was not broken until 150 years later by Caesar. The two emperors sent a letter to Hannibal, detailing their marching route, but this letter was intercepted by Nero. So, after Nero joined forces with Consul Livius, they immediately began to pursue the two emperors. After all, the two emperors commanded 50,000 troops, while Rome, even with the reinforcements brought by Nero, had only 37,000, so Carthage maintained the upper hand throughout the battle. At this point, Nero decisively led a detachment around to the rear of the Carthaginian army, which turned the tide of the battle. The 30,000 soldiers brought by the two emperors from Spain were completely annihilated, and at that moment, the outcome was decided. However, the two emperors truly had the courage of real men. He put on the Carthaginian commander's battle robe, mounted his horse, and charged into the enemy ranks. After a fierce fight, he died heroically on the battlefield. This was simply like a cow climbing a power linear, awesome and electrifying. The historian Titus Livius once wrote, "As the son of Hamilcar and the brother of Hannibal, Hasdrubal did not bring shame upon them." After the battle ended, Nero led 7,000 soldiers and, without rest day or night, hurried back south to the battlefield to confront Hannibal once again. From the moment Nero quietly left his camp, fought a battle with Hasdrubal by the Meteris River, and then returned to his camp in the south, the entire process took 14 days. During this time, Hannibal had no idea that Nero had ever left the camp, nor was he concerned about why Hasdrubal hadn't contacted him, because he believed Hasdrubal was still making his way down the Alps. It wasn't until a group of Roman soldiers threw a package into his camp, and he saw Hasdrubal's severed head that he finally understood everything that had happened. This was the reunion of Hannibal and Hasdrubal after 11 years apart. That very night, Hannibal left the camp and retreated to the southernmost region of Italy, Calabria, and never emerged again. Rome was overjoyed by the victory at the Battle of the Metaurus. During the triumphal ceremony, it was the consul Livius who rode the 4-horse chariot as the triumphator, but everyone knew in their hearts that the true hero was Nero. Although Nero did not share in this glory, he was quite satisfied because he had avenged the humiliation he suffered in Spain. Moreover, he was not punished for leaving his post without authorization. The following year, in 206 BC, Mago learned that his elder brother Hasdrubal, along with all the soldiers he had taken to Italy, had been wiped out, so he decided to fight a life-and-death battle against Scipio in Spain. In 206 BC, a battle took place in Spain that could rival the Battle of Cannae in significance the famous Battle of Ilipa. The two sides in this battle were once again Rome and Carthage, but this time, the victor was Rome. It was precisely because of Rome's victory in this battle that the later Battle of Zama, which would determine Carthage's fate, became possible. This battle was led by the 29-year-old Roman general Scipio, commanding 48,000 soldiers against the Carthaginian generals Hasdrubal, Gisco, and Mago, who led 74,000 troops. At the start, both sides eagerly formed their lines on the plain, but neither was willing to launch the first attack. They simply stared each other down, and although it seemed like no fighting had taken place, it was as if a fierce battle had already been fought. By sunset, both armies, exhausted, returned to their respective camps to rest, only to repeat the same maneuver the next day. Day after day, it went on like this, as if both sides were trying to kill each other with their stares. Gradually, Carthage began to slack off, showing up later and later on the battlefield. Until one day, the Carthaginian army didn't even form up on the battlefield. During these days, Carthage hadn't launched an attack because their general, Gisco, couldn't make up his mind. As for Scipio, he hadn't launched an attack because he had already come up with a plan.
Subscribe to Animystika not to miss anything. Like and share, and join me right away for a new trip in history.